Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and it's open forum today, but it's an internet open forum. We get lots and lots of questions from around the world via the internet, and every now and then we like to just take those and do an open forum show for those who can't call, or it's inconvenient to call, or just sent a question and we thought it was a good question, we'd like to answer it. So I won't be giving out, I probably will be giving out the phone number, but when I do, it will be a mistake. So I'll try to avoid it. Jimmy Akin, our guest both hours. Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Hello, Jimmy Akin.
Hello, Cy Kellett. I noticed something.
What's that?
So in our opening theme music, we have this build, where you have this ramping up of energy. And then there's this moment where it crescendos and then starts winding down the other side. And to me, that's the payoff. The build is like it's building anticipation.
Oh, yeah. And then it resolves a bit.
Then you have the resolution. And you start talking as soon as it starts resolving.
Are you saying this is that I should give you a little more time to the music? Let people have their resolve? Because I can do that. I can do that, but I don't know how.
Just an observation.
Well, let's say I didn't talk, Darren. How long would the music go for? Like, would it eventually it would just be dead air, right? Yeah.
Yeah, eventually. It's not funny. An infinite loop.
No.
We could make it an infinite loop.
Yeah, but I don't think we do have it as an infinite loop. So, all right. Well, I don't know. But I feel like we always start just about the same time in the music, though.
Yeah, I've noticed that too.
There's a certain spot.
But this time I was listening to when that spot is, and it's right after the resolution begins.
Well, I apologize to all of you who really need your musical resolutions.
That's a key part of music, incidentally. The resolve.
Yeah.
In a musical phrase, like when you hear people talk about music being done in a particular key, that sets up, depending on where you start, what key you're starting in. It begins with a note of a particular tone, and you resolve by coming back to that tone, typically.
And it'll drive you crazy if it doesn't resolve at some point. Well, I guess it doesn't drive you crazy, but it can increase your anxiety until they resolve it. All right, so the internet asked you a lot of questions, and I got a whole bunch of them here.
Okay.
But let me ask you this. Tomorrow is Friday.
Yeah.
And that's a very good day because that's the day that Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World drops.
Yeah.
So what do you got?
So this Friday, we are starting to look at the question of life on Mars.
Oh.
And we're going to start by talking about the history of thought on life on Mars and like what happened in the 19th century when astronomers announced they discovered a planet-wide network of canals on Mars. And we're going to talk all about that. And then we're going to talk about the discoveries that were made. Percival Lowell was one of those people. Built the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona.
Right.
And then we're going to talk about it down to the beginning of the Viking missions in the 1970s. And based on prearranged criteria that they had decided, okay, if it meets these criteria when we run the tests, it will mean we have found life.
Oh.
And then they got the probes to Mars, they ran the tests, and it said they found life.
What?
And then they changed their minds. But they only could do so by changing the criteria that they had set before the mission. And subsequent to the Viking missions, we've gotten a lot of new evidence, and we'll be talking about what direction it points in next Friday.
All right.
So it's very interesting, and the probability of life on Mars is a lot higher than you might think.
Oh, and is there a chance that it's related to life on Earth? Yeah. That's what I had thought. I don't call it Mars. I call it Barzoom. But
after Edgar Rice Burroughs' books.
Exactly. I call it what the Martians call it. That's just respectful of the Martians.
Yeah. I tried reading the John Carter of Mars books, where that's from.
Yeah.
I started reading the first one, and John Carter is such a Mary Sue.
Oh, is he really? I didn't know that.
He's totally a Mary Sue. I mean, he's just got all these amazing abilities. I'm sure there are redeeming qualities in the adventure stories, and they're fascinating to read, but I just was deterred in that first book by just how much of a Mary Sue he is. And for people
Unlike Tarzan.
Well, I haven't read the Tarzan books.
Well, I've only seen the Tarzan movies, too.
Yeah, I've seen them, and he's not so much a Mary Sue in those. No. We should explain that term for people who may not know it. A Mary Sue is a type of character that is improbably good at everything. And it's from Star Trek fandom, because after...
Oh, is that really?
Yeah. After the original Star Trek series aired, it was off the air for a long time. And so fans wrote Star Trek fan fiction. And frequently what they would do is they would use what's called an author surrogate character, where they would essentially base a character
On themselves.
on themselves and put it in the story alongside the rest of the Enterprise crew. And it was noticed that these author surrogate characters tended to be improbably good at everything. And they're like the youngest, smartest ensign in Starfleet history or something.
Right.
And they have amazing psychic powers beside that and stuff. And so eventually a parody was written of this genre that came out in a fanzine, and the parody introduced Ensign Mary Sue.
Oh, and she was just great at everything.
Yeah, until her tragic death, which is another common element in these stories.
Oh, the protagonist has to suffer that tragic death.
But if you want an example of an actual Mary Sue that made it on screen in a different franchise, think Rey from Star Wars.
Oh, yes.
She's totally Mary Sue.
She is a Mary Sue. That's true.
Yeah.
All right, time for some internet questions. All the questions come from the internet today, so sit back and relax and enjoy them. We won't be taking calls. We'll go to first question comes from Trevor. Can a person receive spiritual communion if they are in a state of mortal sin? I ask the question in particular for the sake of people in ongoing relationships which they are struggling to sort out, irregular marriage and etc. And I hope the answer will encourage them to keep practicing their faith.
So we should explain what spiritual communion is. It's an alternative to receiving sacramental communion. So let's say you're at Mass and they're distributing communion, but you're not in a position to be able to receive for whatever reason. You could still say, you know, Jesus, I'm here. I want to be close to you. I want to be as spiritually close to you as I can. Come into my heart, or things like that. And yes, a person who is in a state of mortal sin can do that, because it's essentially a form of prayer, of reaching out and saying, Jesus, I want to be spiritually close to you. And that's what you need to do anyway if you're in a state of mortal sin. So you can certainly do it at the time when communion is being distributed. And that's why the concept of spiritual communion was pioneered in the first place, was so that people wouldn't feel pressure, social pressure, to go and receive sacramental communion when they're not qualified to do so. And anybody, anywhere, even if they're not Christian, can say, Jesus, I want to be close to you. Even someone who's not baptized can do that. And so anybody can make an act of spiritual communion and say, Jesus, I want to be close to you. Please, let me get as close to you as I can spiritually, and please come to me and help me.
All right. So, and that would encourage you to keep going to Mass, but despite whatever might be going on. All right. Well, thank you, Trevor, for that. You know what? I think we'll take our first break, because if we get another question, we'll be late for the break. So we'll take our first break. It's Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Catch Catholic Answers Live anytime at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
EWTN is everywhere. EWTN radio programming is provided free of charge to over 500 domestic and international AM and FM radio stations. It's a great teaching tool for Catholics and non-Catholics alike. For a complete list of EWTN AM and FM stations across America, visit EWTNradio.net. At the bottom of the page, click Affiliates. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, Open Forum. both hours today with Jimmy Akin, but it's an internet open forum. All the questions have come to us through the various means people communicate over the internet. And that's why sometimes the names are interesting, because they might be the handle that the person's using on whatever platform they're getting the question to us via. I don't know if Jacko Christine is a name or a handle.
Could be a joint account for a man named Jacko and a woman named Christine who are married. Yeah. Or it could be one person named Jacko Christine.
All right, and I love this question. I'm excited to hear the answer. What was the reason the temple was built in Jerusalem?
So we have to answer this question on two levels, the divine and the human.
Okay.
On the divine level, it's anticipated in the Torah that God will pick some place to set his name, and that's where the temple's going to be. But in the Torah, it doesn't, the first 5 books of the Bible, it doesn't say where that's going to be. It just says in the place where the Lord picks to put his name, you're going to do this. Mm-hmm. And so on the divine level, it's because God chose Jerusalem. Why is something that one could speculate on. What we could say a little bit more about is on the human level. Why was it built there? And the reason was because in the time of King David, David did 2 things that are relevant to this. The first one is after he became king, he conquered Jerusalem and made it his capital. Previously, it had been a city whose inhabitants were known as Jebusites, and they were a Canaanite people, but David ended up conquering Jerusalem, and then he made it his capital. So it's where he built his house, his palace.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the second thing he did is after he had been established as king and he was secure and he's built his own house, he says, why should I be secure in my house and God doesn't have a house? And so I want to build a house for God. And, well, does he want to build it? Well, he wants to build it there in Jerusalem. Presumably, partly because he wants to be close to God, and this is where he is. Also, this is now the capital of Israel, and so it would kind of be a little disrespectful to put God's house anywhere other than the capital of the nation unless God wanted it somewhere else. Put it off in the boonies or something.
Right.
So on a human level, it made sense to put it in Jerusalem. But God said, not so fast. I don't technically need a house, and I've already got the tabernacle, which was a kind of tent house that they used for God, which was actually in a remoter location. And you got blood on your hands. You're a man of blood. You've fought a lot of wars. So I want my house to be built by your son, Solomon, whose name means peace. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be built by a man of peace. So thank you for the thought. Good thought. Going to put it off a little bit.
Let's put a pin in that, and we'll get back to that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Unless, of course, now Solomon's name, which does mean peace, may not have been his birth name.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There is evidence. I want to say it's Jedediah. There's some evidence his birth name may have been either Jedediah or a name similar to that, and that Solomon, Shlomo, was his regnal name. Like how popes take a new name, and sometimes kings maybe. Well, there's some evidence that Solomon may have had a different birth name than his regnal name as king.
Shlomo is the same as Solomon?
Yes.
I never knew that.
Yeah, Solomon is an English adaptation of the Greek equivalent of the Hebrew name, which is typically brought straight into English without the Greek as Shlomo.
Oh, yeah, which among Jewish people, you hear that name, but I don't remember meeting anyone named Solomon. So that must, because that's
it's the equivalent.
It's the equivalent.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
But it's related to shalom in Hebrew or salam in Arabic, both of which mean things like peace and health and well-being and stuff.
Thank you, Jacko Christine, for that question. It's Internet Open Forum. Next one comes from Joanna. How do we respond to Catholics who say they are allowed to call names, for example, calling pro-abortion politicians vermin because Jesus and John the Baptist did it?
Well, neither Jesus nor John the Baptist used vermin, but they did use equivalents, brood of vipers and things like that. And I would say if someone says, well, I can do it because they did it, I'd say, okay, fine. The fact they did it shows this is legitimate in some cases. Mm-hmm. but that doesn't mean it's appropriate in all cases. And there's a question of cultural differences because different cultures have different customs, and something can be much more offensive in one culture than it is in another. If you have a high politeness culture, like say in the American South, and you have a very brusque kind of robust, blunt culture, like say in New York City, then you could have the same thing said, and it would have very different effects on the people who heard it.
Yeah.
New Yorkers have a reputation for being very blunt and having thick skin. So if you were to say, "Oh, you jerk," to someone's face in New York, they might just shrug it off. Whereas if you say the same thing at a tea party in the South, it would be much more offensive.
Right.
So think about the Middle East. What kind of culture do they have there?
Very expressive. I don't know.
Very expressive, very blunt.
Yeah,
and so
right.
they wouldn't take some insults as seriously as American culture would, which is on balance more polite.
Yeah.
I remember back when now I'm from the South, so I'm used to the politeness culture, where you often only have to hint at things for someone to get the message.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was reading in a cultural guidebook one. It said Southerners will be polite up to a fault until they are mad enough to kill you. and that's the way.
Well, that seems like a good way to do it.
Well, that's the way Southerners avoid conflict, is by being scrupulously polite until you get to a breaking point, and you just send signals of where things are, but you don't state them explicitly in polite society. But that's not everybody's way of doing things. Other ways of doing things are as legitimate. It's just different. And I remember a number of years ago, I was taking a class in Aramaic, and I was one of 2 American students in a classroom of more than 30 Iraqis. And the professor was an Iraqi. He was a priest, and he would be very blunt. He would talk to students and say things like, "That is horrible, horrible."
That's not going to go over well in Atlanta.
And so I kind of braced myself going into this class saying, okay, it's going to be like they're New Yorkers, only more so. And it was like that, and it was all fine because I knew how to navigate that situation.
Right.
But when we read stuff in the New Testament, it's coming from this Middle Eastern cultural context, which tends to be more expressive than American culture, at least in face-to-face interactions. So you have to take that into account, and not everything that you see people saying in the New Testament is going to have exactly the same effects if you were to do the same thing today in America. So you need to take that into account. Also, you need to take into account, well, what's your goal here? If your goal is to win someone over, calling them vermin is probably not the right thing.
Yeah.
That's just going to alienate them. It's not going to win them over. But even in America, we have certain things that we would say that aren't meant particularly harshly. Like if we say, oh, what a bunch of rats we've got in Congress.
Oh, yeah, right.
Okay, rats, even though rats are vermin, it sounds very different to say, oh, those rats, as opposed to they're vermin.
Yeah.
But then also, look at what happened to Jesus and John the Baptist.
That's a good point, too.
They both ended up getting killed.
Yeah, right.
And so if you're going to be calling people names, be aware that there are these cultural differences, and think about what you're trying to accomplish, and will this really serve that goal, or are you just venting hostility in a way that's not constructive?
Yeah.
And what are the long-term effects of your behaving this way going to do to yourself and others and the people you're interacting with?
Joanna, thank you very, very much for the question. Appreciate that. It's Internet Open Forum. And up next, this one comes from Sandy. Sandy asks, what is, in depth, the Catholic teaching on why Jesus had to die on the cross? What exactly does atonement mean?
So let's deal with the second question first. Atonement is a kind of unique term. We have all these theological terms like justification, sanctification, expiation, things like that.
Right.
And none of them come from English. They're all based on like Greek or Latin or something like that.
Right.
So we tend to inherit most of our theological vocabulary from these other languages. The exception to that is atonement. Atonement is like the English theological term that came to us from our own language, from
Good for
English.
us.
Yeah.
Nice going, English-speaking world.
This is kind of our word. And its roots, so if you look at it and you try to break it down and say, well, what could the roots of this word? Well, atonement. It's got an at right at the front of it. Mm-hmm. It's got a one, O-N-E, and it's got a ment, M-E-N-T. So at one ment. And that's actually where its roots are from. It's a single word that is compressed from at one ment. And so ment tends to mean like a making of something or a state of something. And then if two people are at one, it means they're in agreement, they're in sync, they're in harmony, things like that. And so atonement is the act of taking two parties and making them at one in the sense that they are in agreement, they're in harmony, they've got good relations with each other. And if I were to use a different English word that gets at the same thought, I would use reconcile. If you reconcile two parties so that previously they were estranged, but now they're not estranged anymore, now they're in good relations, then they are at one, and that's essentially what atonement is. Jesus, by his death on the cross, made God and man at one. He reconciled the two parties. And that's then the answer to the first question, why, and I can't do it in depth because live radio show, as opposed to write a book.
Yeah.
But that's why Jesus had to die on the cross. It was because God and man were not reconciled. They were in a state of alienation, and they needed to become reconciled or made at one, and Jesus' death accomplished that. Now, how it accomplished that is a matter of theological speculation, and there are different theories about it which are not necessarily mutually exclusive. The atonement is a rich event in salvation history that can operate on multiple levels.
Okay.
But to my mind, based on the biblical data, the fundamental model is sacrifice, that Jesus offered himself as a sacrifice, or he offered his life as a sacrifice or a gift to God to bring about reconciliation. And this is like when you have two people on earth who are estranged. If one of them wants to bridge that gap that exists between them, he may give a gift. Back when my wife and I were courting, I knew if we had a fight or something like that, bring her a teddy bear.
Oh, yeah. Right.
And because she loved teddy bears, and that would be a nice peace offering, and we could then rebuild our relation. I mean, we hadn't destroyed our relationship, but we could rebuild good feelings and things like that.
Right.
And in the same way, Jesus offers his life based on the pattern of sacrifice that Israel used, and that really all nations around the world use. When you have people that you're alienated from, doing something nice for them, giving them a gift, is a good way to restore good relations, and that's what Jesus did for us.
Thank you very, very much, Sandy. Appreciate that question. It's an internet open forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and all the questions have come via the internet today. Let's go. Teresa asks this. I like how she wrote it. Limbo. What is the idea based on? Who came up with the idea? Why do some people believe that is what the church teaches?
So the idea of limbo is one that developed. Now there are two different limbos. The one that's relevant here is sometimes called the limbo of the infants. And it arose as a theological speculation to try to figure out what would happen to babies who die without baptism. So since they're babies, they can't commit personal sin. So they shouldn't suffer in the afterlife if suffering is a punishment for sin in the afterlife. So they shouldn't suffer. But on the other hand, they're not baptized. So they don't have the full grace of God in their souls. So it would seem like they shouldn't go to heaven either. And so you started having figures like St. Augustine speculate and say, okay, since they're not baptized, they don't have sanctifying grace, they won't go to heaven. So they must be in hell in some sense, but they shouldn't really be suffering because they haven't committed personal sin. So maybe they're on like the fringe of hell where the suffering is the lightest. And the Latin word for fringe is limbus. And that's where we get limbo. Originally, limbo was conceptualized as the fringe of hell. But there's more to say when we get back.
Teresa, thanks for the question. It's Internet Open Forum today on Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest. We'll be right back to find out the status of limbo right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com. Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
I don't want to talk. That sounded like a resolve to me.
There you go.
I don't know. That sounded like a resolve, so I waited on that one. There's a little bit of groovy music.
Let the audience have their payoff. Good job.
Right. Thank you very, very much. That is good music. I love the groovy music. I'm not giving out the phone number. I almost did it right there. I'm not giving out the phone number because all of our questions have already been vetted from the internet. We get questions every different way you could get a question, I suppose, and lots of them through electronic means, and that's how they have come to us for the show today. And Teresa asked Jimmy about limbo. What's the idea based on? Who came up with the idea? And you were explaining that limbo comes from this idea of being on the fringe of hell.
Right. And so figures like St. Augustine reasoned that, well, unbaptized babies must be in hell, but they must receive only the lightest punishment possible because they haven't committed actual sin. Well, okay, so that's the starting point for the idea of limbo, but it then has a kind of story arc after that, where by the Middle Ages, you had people saying, you know, they shouldn't suffer at all if they don't have personal sin. And so even though we're still calling it limbo and technically it's still the fringe of hell, it's an area where they actually don't suffer. And then you had people saying, you know, just because you don't have the full glory of the beatific vision, you know, getting to see God directly, intuitively in his awesomeness, you can still be happy. You know, like we can be happy here on earth, even though we don't have the beatific vision right now. So maybe actually these unbaptized babies not only are they not suffering, maybe they have great natural happiness. They just don't have the supernatural happiness of seeing God's essence. And so limbo came to be understood as a place of potentially great natural happiness, just not heaven. And it ended up becoming not just a theological opinion, but it found its way into actual church documents. And so you'll find it, for example, at the beginning of the 20th century in the Catechism of Pius X. So it was part of the ordinary magisterium of the church for a while. But by the mid-20th century, you had a reevaluation. And there had always been people who questioned this, theologians, including respectable ones. And by the mid-20th century, there had been a development in theology that then spilled over into doctrine, where you had theologians saying, we don't really know a lot about these babies and their state, and maybe limbo is how it works, but there are other possibilities too.
Yeah.
Like maybe God could give his grace to the babies without the sacrament of baptism, just like he does for catechumens.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And who may die before they're able to be baptized, but that doesn't mean that they don't go to heaven. God gives them the grace of baptism early based on their desire for baptism and their desire to be a Christian. And certainly the parents would want to baptize their baby if they had the opportunity, if they're good, Christian parents. And even if they don't, the church would want that for the babies.
Right.
So maybe there's a kind of proxy baptism of desire for these children that could give them the grace needed to go to heaven. Or maybe God could enlighten them in the moment of their death and enable them to make a choice for or against receiving his grace, in which case they would have a personal decision they've made. So there are other possibilities here. And in the Second Vatican Council, it was taught, this is in Gaudium et Spes, it was taught that God makes it possible. His desire for the salvation of men is so great, he makes it possible for everyone to be saved, even if it's in some mysterious way we don't understand. And if that's true, then that would seem to apply to babies too. And so by the time of the 1990s, with the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it was said that we can entrust them, these babies, to a merciful God who desires their salvation, and we can hope that he saves them in some way that we don't know about because he hasn't told us about it. And then after the turn of the century, Benedict XVI asked the International Theological Commission, which is an advisory group that is run by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, to take a look at this question and see if they could find ways that were alternatives to limbo that could kind of be given the church's blessing. And they did that. And then the International Theological Commission published its document saying there's a bunch of possibilities, including limbo, but there are other possibilities too. And the International Theological Commission is only allowed to publish its documents on the condition that the magisterium does not have a problem with them.
Okay.
And so when they got permission to publish this document, that meant the magisterium does not have a problem with people exploring this range of different options. And so consequently, limbo is no longer part of the ordinary magisterium of the church. It's been put back in the status of a theological opinion that is possible, but alongside other possible opinions. And so since not everybody is up on the current state of things, that's why some people will say this is the teaching of the church, because it used to be, but it's not anymore because further doctrinal development has happened.
Teresa, great questions. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. It's Internet Open Forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and all of our questions have come from the internet today. Next one is from Dylan. Dylan asks, in a scary scenario, such as a monkey-human hybrid, is that baby made in the image of God?
Okay, so the image of God is a complex concept, and it's been understood different ways down through the history of theology. But based on recent studies of ancient Near Eastern literature and based on recent discussions of it by the Magisterium and the International Theological Commission, if I can simplify it a little bit, the biblical concept of the image of God, as we find in Genesis 1, where God makes man in his image, part of what that means is man is God's representative on earth. In the ancient Near East, the king was considered the image of the gods. He's the God's representative on earth. And what Genesis does is it says it's not just the king, it's everybody. We're all God's representative on earth. And that's why you have the command to fill and subdue the earth and so forth on God's behalf. And so man is the ruler of earthly creation as God's vassal. We're here to do God's will on the earth. And we represent God to the rest of the earthly creation. So, and this also means that we have the ability to relate. So we relate to God, we relate to each other, and so forth, and this relational aspect is a key component. Now, do other creatures have the ability to relate? Well, to some degree, sure. Some of them are quite social.
Yeah.
But they don't relate in a human way. And that's key for understanding the image of God, the way the Bible uses the term. You can use terms all kinds of different ways, and they can be legitimate. You know, like in Alice in Wonderland, a term means exactly what I say it means. That's known as a stipulative definition. Right. But if you're using the term the way the Bible does, it distinguishes man from all the rest of earthly creation. Right. So even though other creatures may have aspects that are similar to humans, like they're social animals or something, they don't do this in a human way, and they don't relate to God the way we do. As far as we know, other animals don't even have a conception of God. And so they don't have the kind of relationship with God that we do, and they can't service his image. So in the case of a monkey-human hybrid, you could take genes from a monkey and match them to genes from a human and come up with a monkey-human hybrid. The problem, now I'm assuming this is 50-50 matching. Okay. If you only take like a single allele from a monkey and stick it in a human genome, it's going to be a human. Yeah. It's just got a monkey gene. But it's still going to be a human.
A human that can climb really well.
Depending on the alleles.
Okay.
But if you've matched them 50-50, so you're talking a true 50-50 hybrid, then I don't know if it would survive. It would probably depend on which genes you're matching. But monkeys diverge. So we are not monkeys. Humans belong to the zoological family of apes. Yeah. And apes and monkeys are not the same thing. They are related, but they are not the same thing. Monkeys tend to be much smaller. They have tails and things like that. Apes tend to be larger, and they don't have tails. And so our last common ancestor with monkeys, I'm sure, was over 10 million years ago. On evolutionary theory, our genomes are going to be very different. And if you made a monkey-human hybrid and it survived, it would not act in a remotely human fashion. And therefore, it would not have the image of God because it is not capable of relating to humans or to God in a human way. Okay, so that's monkeys. What if you pick someone closer?
Bonobo.
Well, I was going to say, our closest relatives, evolutionarily speaking, are chimpanzees. They belong to the genus Pan, which is the closest one to the genus Homo, which is what we belong to. And our most recent common ancestor was about 6 million years ago. Their DNA is much more compatible with ours, but we have different numbers of chromosomes. We humans have 2 pairs of 23 chromosomes, so we've got 46. Chimpanzees have 48. So if you took the germ cells of a human and a chimpanzee and put them together, it might have like 47 chromosomes.
Well, that's not going to work.
Well, okay, so here's the thing. It's close enough that there's been speculation about this. And in the 20th century, there were attempts in some countries elsewhere in the world to come up with human Z's.
Oh.
And the human Z's, at least based on the reports that there are about this, and yes, I'm going to cover this on Mysterious World,
You better now.
did not survive. But more recently, again, in countries other than the United States, there have been more successful attempts to create human Z embryos, which they then terminated before they were allowed to develop very far. Now, they shouldn't be doing that.
No.
This is wrong. But if you had a human Z that you raised to adulthood, you'd have to evaluate it and say, is this capable, even though it looks weird, is it capable of relating to humans and to God on a human level? And if the answer is yes, then it could serve as God's representative and would be in the image of God. Because you don't have to be human to be in the image of God. The angels are too.
Yeah.
That's who God's talking to when he says, let us make man in our image. He's talking to the angels. And so they also are God's representatives, and they relate to God and each other in at least a human way, but really a superhuman way. So if you engineered a life form and it was able to relate to humans and to God in a human way, even if it's a little weird, it would still be in the image of God. Just like if you have humans who have genetic abnormalities or developmental abnormalities and they look or act weird, but they're still fundamentally human, then they still have the image of God, even if they're disfigured by various abnormalities.
The artificial creation of that kind of life involves all kinds of evils, though.
Yes,
Things
it does.
that you should not be
Now,
doing.
that's not to say genetic engineering is wrong, and it's not to say all hybridization is wrong.
Right.
But making something that's half human and half chimpanzee, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Also, don't try to bring back Neanderthals. I mean, good riddance to those guys.
Yeah, I don't want the Neanderthals back, but I really do want the woolly mammoth back.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I'd
Okay,
love
why
to see
not?
the woolly mammoth again. All right, we'll take a break. We'll be right back with more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley of the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Do you love praying for people? Have you ever wanted to use your gift of prayer to share Jesus with others and build up the body of Christ? Start a public prayer station with St. Paul Street Evangelization. Listen to people's needs, pray with them, or invite them to meet you at church. St. Paul Street Evangelization can help you get started. Find out how at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
Our mission is to transform the world one woman at a time through a spiritual program of formation that helps them to see who they are as daughters of the Most High God and to enjoy the gift that God has given to them by virtue of their femininity.
Women of Grace with Jonette Bankovic-Williams. Tomorrow morning, 11 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am your host, Cy Kellett. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and it's an internet open forum today. All of our questions for Jimmy have come from the internet, and there's a whole lot of good ones. This one comes from Daniel. What features distinguish the concept of progressive revelation, that is, God's self-revelation over time to Abraham and Israel, etc., culminating in Jesus Christ, from the false concept of process theology?
Okay, so Daniel's already explained what progressive revelation is. It's God discloses more about himself over the course of time, and we see that play out as Scripture gets written. Process theology is a recent theological movement, particularly in the Protestant world, but not exclusively. It's based on a philosophical movement involving the philosopher Charles Hartshorne, and the basic idea is that God changes over time, that he does not have an eternal, atemporal, or outside of time existence. Instead, he actually changes. And so it's not just the world that changes, but God changes alongside the world. And this is kind of the root. I mean, there are other aspects to process theology, but to my mind, that's kind of the root of what it is. And among the things that Charles Hartshorne would say is it's equally true to say God creates the world as to say the world creates God. That those are equally true. And so so that gives you a sense of the magnitude of change that that process theology can envision God as involving. And so how is progressive revelation different than process theology is what Daniel's asking. And the answer is progressive revelation supposes that God is eternal, he's stable, he's immutable. What changes is our knowledge of God. And process theology says not only does our knowledge of God change, but God changes too.
Yeah.
And so that's the essential difference. Normal theology says God doesn't change, our knowledge changes. Process theology says they both change.
Okay, and that's why he put the word false there, I suppose, because
yes.
he knew that that was not right. God does not change. Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate that question. Internet Open Forum continues. We go now to a question from Ido. Is it a sin? No, I'm sorry, I beg your pardon. It is a sin if we do not go to church, but a pandemic forces us to stay home. How can we teach our kids about this?
Well, of course, it's going to depend on the age of the kids and what they're capable of understanding. I mean, you know, very small children might not be able to grasp this, but as soon as they are, I would explain to the children that it is a sin not to go to church or not to go to Mass if you don't have a good reason. But there can be good reasons not to go to Mass on a given Sunday or holy day of obligation. Like you're in the hospital. How are you supposed to go to Mass if you're in the hospital and you're hooked up to machines and stuff?
Yeah.
And in fact, the Code of Canon Law recognizes that there are reasons that are serious enough to excuse a person from the obligation to go to Mass. And examples of that include needing to care for children, for one of them. If let's say you're a single parent and you've got to take care of these kids and the kids can't be taken to Mass for some reason, then it's okay for you to take care of them or another sick person or something like that. Well, okay, so why would the kids maybe not be able to be taken to Mass? Maybe because they're sick and you don't want to get other people sick. Or maybe you're sick and you don't want to get other people sick. And that's a legitimate reason not to go to Mass. To avoid getting other people sick, and to take care of yourself, because when you're sick, you need to take care of yourself, and you don't need the strain of going out in public and stuff like that frequently. You need to stay in bed, and so that is an explanation for what can happen in a pandemic, where lots of people are getting sick. And in order to protect your own health and protect the health of others, you can be excused from your obligation to go to Mass, because it's not always sinful to stay away from Mass. There are legitimate reasons for, and that includes pandemics. And this is not new in the 21st century. You go back hundreds of years, they had a lot more pandemics than we do now.
Right.
And because they didn't have
nasty ones.
Yeah, and because they didn't have modern medicine. And people then, too, could stay away from Mass legitimately. In fact, you may have heard of you may have heard of Boccaccio's book, The Decameron.
Right, yeah.
Well, The Decameron it's an Italian book about a group of people who have fled the city, which has a plague, and they're staying in the countryside while the plague burns itself out. And to pass the time, they tell stories over the course of 10 days, which is why it's called the Decameron. It means 10 days. And this gives us some very famous stories in Western literature. But notice what the people in the story are doing. They have fled the plague, and they're in the countryside weathering it, and thus they are not at Mass during the period of those 10 days.
Thanks very much, Ido. I appreciate that question. It's funny how the Decameron got so much attention over the course of the last year and a half. So many people rediscovered it.
Yeah.
All right, the next one, again, it's Internet Open Forum, so all our questions come from the Internet today. Let's go to a question from Marino. It's a little bit long, but I'll work my way through it for you. In 2 Samuel 24, the scriptures say that Yahweh's anger was kindled against Israel, and so Yahweh incited David to take a census and then punished him and the people for doing it. However, when the same story is told in 1 Chronicles 21, Satan is the one who stands and incites David to number Israel, and then God judges David and the people for it. Most commentaries deal with this by supposing that maybe God was angry in 2 Samuel, and so he allowed Satan in 1 Chronicles to incite Israel's king to sin. But in 2 Samuel, God is the one who incites. In the other passage, Satan incites. Is there any way to deal with this? You want me to keep reading?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay. Keep in mind that the Chronicles account is a later retelling of an earlier event, so it is possible that the chronicler is attempting to clean up the story because it did not seem proper or noble to have God being so incensed or inciting David to sin. Or we might look and see that the term Satan was not always speaking of the biblical character that we have become familiar with. The famed instances that we know of in the Old Testament were referring to an accuser in a legal sense, or an adversary. So it is possible that the unnamed adversary in 1 Chronicles has been named in 2 Samuel, and that is a frightening ordeal. What to do when Yahweh is your Satan?
So that's a bit of a provocative way of putting it. It would be more neutral to say when Yahweh is your adversary.
Yeah.
Because that's what the word Satan means in Hebrew, is adversary. Now, for years, I have used the initial solution that Marino mentions of saying, okay, God is really, when it says that God did this, and then when it says that Satan did it, it's God allowing Satan to do it. Mm-hmm. And that is a solution that works. The question is it the solution that best fits the data?
Okay.
Well, recently I've been doing a study of the way that the term Satan is used in the Old Testament. Now, in the New Testament, it's very clear that Satan is a particular supernatural figure, an angel, that is the leader of the rebels against God in the spiritual world. It's one person who is an angel who's fallen and is opposing God, and he's the leader of the forces of darkness. That's very clear in the way the New Testament uses the term Satan.
Okay.
But when you go to the Old Testament and you look at all of the passages that use the term Satan, it's not nearly that clear. There are some passages where the word Satan is used for a perfectly human adversary. You know, you got two people, they're adversaries, they're both Satan to each other, they're both adversaries.
Yeah.
But then there are references where the term Satan is used for supernatural beings. So not human beings, but supernatural beings. And sometimes it's used in a specific sense. So we're talking about one particular adversary,
okay,
who has a specific identity. And what Hebrew does in that case is it puts the definite article, the Hebrew word for the Satan.
Okay.
And the Hebrew word definite article is ha, so it becomes ha Satan, the Satan. And there's the music. And we've got a cliffhanger on our hands, don't we?
Da, da, da.
So we'll finish on the other side of the break in the next hour.
It's if you're going to have a cliffhanger, a demonic one, that'll keep people around. All right, so we will take a break, and we'll conclude the answer to this question. It's an internet open forum today. Jimmy Akin is our guest, so we're not taking calls, but we got a lot of great questions lined up. Hang around for a quick minute, and we'll be right back to finish our discussion of Satan And if you're in a shopping mood, there's a store-wide sale going on over at shop.catholic.com. Everything 10 to 25% off. Some stuff up to 50% off at shop.catholic.com. Right back with more with Jimmy Akin, Internet Open Forum. I'm letting the music resolve again.
There you go.
Yeah, it seems
nice
like,
resolution.
Yeah, there we go. Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Well, we left you hanging with an explanation of who did it. Was it God or Satan who tempted or prompted David to take a census that it was wrong to take? And one coming from the second book of Samuel, the other one coming from the First Chronicles, two different tellings. And you were in the midst of telling us you've done a study of the use of that word.
So historically, I've used the resolution of saying, okay, so really what's happening here is God allows the devil, Satan, to tempt David, and then there are these consequences. But I've been doing this study of how Hebrew uses the term Satan, which just means adversary. Mm-hmm. And even though it's clear in the New Testament that Satan, capital S, is a single figure that is the leader of the demonic forces, when you look at the Old Testament use of the term Satan, it's not being used that way. Sometimes it's used of human beings in a perfectly ordinary sense of this man is your adversary. He's your Satan, mm-hmm. which is, adversary, Satan, same thing. In other passages, Satan is used of a supernatural figure, but when it's used for a specific one, it tends to have the Hebrew definite article, ha, which is the Hebrew equivalent of the word the in front of it. So you'll have ha-Satan, the Satan.
Okay.
And you see this, for example, in the book of Daniel, where you've got this scene in heaven in Daniel 1 where God is in his heavenly temple, his throne room, and all of the sons of God, which are high-ranking angelic beings that form the divine council, they come in, and also Ha-Satan comes in. And God says, where have you been? What you been doing? And he says, well, I've been walking up and down on the earth and looking at stuff. And that's his job. He's the Ha-Satan, the Satan in this case, is an official in God's heavenly court who is essentially the prosecutor. Mm-hmm. It's his job to look up and down on earth for humans doing bad stuff and report them back to God. Mm-hmm. That's his job. So he's been doing his job. And God says, have you noticed my servant Job? Isn't he awesome? And at this point, the prosecutor, the Satan, the adversary, challenges God mm-hmm. and says, oh, he's a fair weather friend. He only seems nice because you've blessed him. Take away his blessings and he'll curse you to your face. And so is it good for a prosecutor to challenge God's judgment on something?
No.
So this is a bad guy. Even though he's an official in the heavenly court, he's also a bad guy. And that's why the New Testament picks up on this and depicts him as the leader of the demonic forces. He is, but he also has this other function in God's overall plan, as we see in the book of Job. But what do we find when we look at the passage in First Chronicles that says a Satan or some Satan opposed Israel and caused David to take a census? There's no definite article. It says Satan, not Ha-Satan. Mm-hmm. And so it's not clearly the definite figure that we find in Job or in the prophets. Instead, there's only one other place in the Old Testament where you have Satan used for a supernatural figure with no definite article. And you know who it is on that occasion? Mm-mm. The angel of the Lord.
Oh. This
is in Numbers 22, which is where you have the account of Balaam, the Canaanite prophet. And he's been summoned to curse Israel, and he's traveling down the road with his donkey, and the angel of the Lord appears in the road ahead of him. He doesn't see the angel of the Lord, but the donkey does, mm-hmm. and the donkey stops, and so Balaam starts beating on the donkey. And the angel then manifests and says, "Don't beat your donkey. Your donkey just saved your life." Because I would have killed you if she hadn't stopped, and because I'm here as your Satan, mm-hmm. I'm here as your adversary, And so you have the angel of the Lord being described as Satan, as an adversary of Balaam. And there's no definite article here, so he's an adversary of Balaam. And the angel of the Lord, if you look in other passages, is often identified, the angel of Yahweh, that's what Lord is in these passages. So this is the angel of Yahweh. You look in other passages, and there is a blurring of the identity of the angel of Yahweh and Yahweh himself. That's why you'll have various passages like the sacrifice of Isaac in Genesis, and there'll be an angel that calls out to Abraham and says something, and then it'll say, and Yahweh said. Right. And you have this interesting mixing of it being described as the angel of Yahweh or just Yahweh himself. There's this blending of the two figures, and that's led in later centuries around Jesus' time to what's called the two powers in heaven doctrine, that you have Yahweh and the second Yahweh. Mm-hmm. And so there's an awareness of some kind of plurality in the Godhead. Well, the only two passages in the Old Testament where you have Satan, without the definite article, referring to a supernatural figure are Numbers 22, where it's the angel of Yahweh, and 1 Chronicles 21. Guess who's also in 1 Chronicles 21? After David takes the census, God sends a plague, and who is administering the plague? It's the angel of Yahweh.
Oh, okay, so he's the adversary.
And so there is a significant case to be made that it is the angel of Yahweh / Yahweh that is the adversary of Israel in this passage. And so I am not at a point where I can say that's the definite solution.
Right.
But by your sin, you can make Yahweh your adversary, and even though he loves you. There's another sense in which you can make Yahweh your adversary. And there's a good argument to be made that that's what's happening in these two passages, that because of its sins, Israel has made Yahweh its adversary. And so David ends up taking this sentence that provides the occasion for Yahweh to judge Israel.
Thank you so much for that question, Marino. Appreciate it. Very well articulated. It's Internet Open Forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and all the questions have come from the Internet. This one comes from Charles. Must we wait for someone to be declared venerable or a servant of God before praying for their canonization and or intercession?
So in terms of their canonization, no. You can pray for someone's canonization at any time you want. I could pray for your canonization right now, Psychelit. I mean, just because you're not dead yet doesn't mean God won't remember my prayer once you are dead.
Yeah, that's right.
He's omniscient, and so he would definitely remember that I was praying for your canonization even before you died. So you can do that at any time you want. In terms of intercession, well, since you're not dead yet, you're not in heaven. I mean, I could ask for your intercession right now.
Sure.
And you could intercede on earth for me. You couldn't intercede in heaven since you're not there yet.
Thank you for putting the yet on there.
Although you might remember that when you are in heaven, you might remember that I asked all those years ago.
Right? Yeah, right.
But no, even with intercession, you don't have to wait for someone to be canonized. You can ask for, let's say your spouse dies.
Yeah.
You can immediately ask your spouse to pray for you on the other side. Whether they're in purgatory or heaven, it doesn't matter. They can talk to God just like you can. Now, there is a limitation on the circumstances in which you do this. If you're, let's say, at church and you're doing a litany of the saints, so you're asking different saints in heaven for their intercession, they have to be at least a blessed. So for the public invocation of saints, public meaning as part of an official church function.
Got it. Yeah.
If you're doing it as part of an official function, like a worship service, the person you're asking for their intercession has to be either blessed or fully canonized as a saint. But privately or in church but unofficially, you can ask anybody you want for their intercession.
Charles, thanks very much for the question. It's time for our first break this hour. We'll come back with more internet questions for Jimmy Akin on this Internet Open Forum on Catholic Answers Live.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
He was a doctor of the Church and one of the greatest defenders of Christ's divinity.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Athanasius of Alexandria fought against the Arian heresy that questioned the divinity of Christ. He once condemned the Arians as opposers of Christ who had dug a pit of ungodliness. It was said of him, Athanasius contra mundum, Athanasius against the world, but for Christ. He died in 373.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
I wasn't trying to let the music resolve. I had a little cough in my throat there. Sorry. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's an Internet Open Forum. All kinds of great questions from the Internet. This one comes from Christian. Jimmy, what are your secrets to success as an apologist? And what are the blessings and challenges of an apologist?
Okay, so one resource I can mention that you could get more detail than what I'll be able to give here on the show is the Introduction to Apologetics course I did for the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics, because I talk about apologetic method and how to do it and things like that, and that's sort of some of the secrets of success. But basically, the secrets of success that I try to use in general terms are threefold. The first is be very precise about what's true. So that's making sure I know the answer.
Okay.
And that I'm fair and that I'm not biasing the evidence in some way. I try to be very precise about what the evidence is and try to make sure I'm right. So I try in whatever I say. So that's kind of the first aspect of it. The second is I try to be very precise in how I communicate it. So I don't want to mislead people by being sloppy in how I say things or by putting my thumb on the scale. I want to be very fair and balanced in how I present things and open-minded. And then the third is I want to be charitable towards not just my position or the position of people who agree with me, but also towards the people who disagree with me. I want to treat them with the same respect I want. I try to apply the golden rule. And really the golden rule is the key to it all. Because if someone is trying to convince me of something, I would want them to be very charitable, including towards my current view, whatever it may be on a topic, and I would want them to be very precise, and I would want them to be very careful in making sure they're using accurate evidence. And if I want them to do that when they're trying to convince me of something, I need to do those things when I'm trying to convince them of something.
Yeah.
In terms of, so the golden rule is the master key.
Yeah.
As it is in every area of life. In terms of blessings and challenges, well, I get the blessing of the joy of discovery.
Yeah.
Because I love learning new things. You know, Richard Feynman, the physicist, has a book called The Pleasure of Finding Things Out. And I love finding things out. I'm very blessed to be able to work in this career that allows me to constantly be learning new things. So I have the joy of discovery. And then I have the joy of teaching, of communicating that information to others and experiencing their joy of discovery. And hearing from them how the information I've provided has helped them in various ways. And so those are the the primary blessings, the one that I get myself from learning, and then what I experience from others as I'm able to help them. In terms of challenges, the big challenges are being right and being charitable.
Being right, meaning you've got to do the work in order to get your answer right.
Well, yeah, and phrasing it correctly, and so it's essentially the keys to success. The challenge is employing those.
Yeah, right. Okay, very good, very good. Christian, thank you very much for that question. The next one comes from Bo. Bo asks, can you address the Catholic charismatic renewal and just Pentecostalism, charismaticism in general? I grew up in that and am a little disheartened that it's found its way into the church. How should Catholics like me view the CCR, in particular, Catholic Charismatic Renewal in particular, and the charismatic Pentecostal movement more broadly?
So let's talk about the Pentecostal movement because it's the one that started first historically. Mm-hmm. Now, there have been reports all the way down through history of God giving miraculous gifts to his people. It was apparently very common for that to happen in the first century, not as common in later centuries, but it was still there. Then after the Reformation happened, you had a lot of people in the Protestant community say the age of miraculous gifts is over. And part of the reason they seem to have done that is because they wanted to undermine Catholic reports of miracles.
Oh.
Because if you have, say, oh, yeah, Saint so-and-so did this, isn't that proof that, like, we should ask the saints for their intercession?
Yeah.
I mean, this person got miraculously healed of cancer because of this saint's intercession. So you had the pressure in the Protestant community, which is trying to distinguish itself from the Catholic community, to say, oh, no, that's not what's happening here. The age of miracles is over. But there's nothing in the Bible that says that.
Yeah.
And that's a problem if you're a Protestant and you want to say there's no more miracles, because you're using sola scriptura, the Bible alone, to form your theology, and there's nothing in the Bible that says that there's not going to be any more miracles after the apostolic age. And so that led, particularly in the 19th century here in America, as part of an event known as the Second Great Awakening, for people to question this. And so you'd have in the 19th century these like campfire meetings or camp meetings, revivals going on, and people would be getting really enthusiastic and really excited, and they would claim to be experiencing God's power in their lives in these revival settings. Sometimes they had some rather colorful experiences. I mean, today you'll hear about things like laughing in the Spirit and stuff like that. Well, okay, you should get in your TARDIS and go to the 19th century, because they had some really interesting phenomena that they reported. Back in the day, back then, hunting was a big thing. That's how people would often get their meat. So they'd go out with their dogs and they would hunt, let's say, raccoons. Well, if you're a raccoon, you don't want to be hunted. So you might do something like climb a tree to get away from the dogs. And the dogs would then identify the tree you're in, and they'd be barking up the tree at you to let the hunter know where you are, or whatever animal they're hunting. Well, so there was a reported experience in 19th century Second Great Awakening revival meetings known as treeing the devil.
Really?
Yeah, where human beings would act like dogs and tree the devil. So there would be a tree, they would perceive the devil up in the tree, and they would like howl at the devil in the tree to intimidate him.
Yeah.
Also, we have these references in Scripture to water baptism, and John the Baptist also talks about being baptized in fire, and there's also discussion of being baptized with the Spirit. Well, there was one guy in the 19th century who had 3 additional baptisms, not only water baptism, fire baptism, and Spirit baptism, but baptism of oxite, baptism of lyddite, and baptism of dynamite.
Well, I don't want that last one.
It's supposed to be a very powerful spiritual experience.
I bet it would be.
Yeah.
Baptized with dynamite.
Yeah. So there are a lot of interesting phenomena.
Yeah.
But really yet to the Pentecostal movement. But we are in a phase of American religious history where you have people who, in a new kind of way, are being open to powerful spiritual experiences of a miraculous nature in a way they hadn't been in previous centuries. And so when we come to the 20th century, in 1901, you have, in fact, on like New Year's Day, 1901, you have this group praying, and one of the women in it starts speaking in tongues. And that's considered often the birth of the Pentecostal movement. Another early marker that's also sometimes considered the birth of the Pentecostal movement is in 1906, 5 years later. In Los Angeles, there was a church on Azusa Street. Azusa stands for...
I know this. Okay. You told me this before. Yeah. A to Z USA.
A to Z USA, Azusa, right. So on Azusa Street, there was a revival. And speaking in tongues and other miraculous gifts like prophecy and healings and stuff were part of that. And so you had this movement start in the Protestant community that tried to bring back some of the spiritual gifts that, like St. Paul talks about in Romans 12 and 1 Corinthians 12, and especially 1 Corinthians 12. And this originally this was kind of an outsider movement. This was not happening in regular mainline Protestant churches. And so early Pentecostals started to form their own churches, and that's what gave us churches like the Assemblies of God. That's the biggest of the Pentecostal churches. But then in the 1960s, you started to have this same phenomena start to spill over into mainline Protestant churches. So you could have Baptists or Methodists or Presbyterians who were reporting experiences like this, or Anglicans and Episcopalians here in the U.S. And that's what the charismatic movement is. It's the reporting of these charismatic spiritual gifts, these miraculous gifts, in mainline Protestant churches, not just like off in the Assemblies of God or something. And at the same time that happened, it started happening by the late 1960s, it started happening in Catholic churches too. And that's the origin of the Catholic charismatic movement. Now, in terms of what to think about this, well, I can't. One of the things the Congregation that the Doctrine of the Faith has pointed out is that the Holy Spirit can give new gifts at different points in history. It's not like there's a fixed list that the Holy Spirit is confined to.
Right.
And so could the Holy Spirit touch somebody's heart in a spiritual way by letting them tree the devil?
Yeah.
Well, it's not my spirituality, but I can't rule it out in principle.
Yeah.
On the other hand, do I think everyone who claims in these movements to be speaking in tongues is actually doing so, or that every prophecy they claim to have or every healing they report is genuinely supernatural? Well, I want to be charitable and respect their beliefs, but that doesn't mean I need to conclude that.
Yeah.
And so I think that the solution is to heed St. Paul's advice in 1 Thessalonians 5, where he says, don't despise prophesyings, don't quench the spirit, but test everything and hold fast to what is good. And that's generally the approach that the Catholic Church has taken towards the charismatic renewal in its own ranks.
Right.
Not to dismiss it, but not to just say, oh, everyone needs to be charismatic either. It involves a discernment process, and God can reach different people in different ways. For some people to have a charismatic spirituality, that's great. If that's how God is reaching you and that helps foster your closeness to Him, that's great. On the other hand, when it comes to particular reports of charismatic phenomena, well, we need to exercise critical thinking. In 1 Corinthians 12 to 14, St. Paul lays down some principles about when and how these gifts are to be used, and those principles are not always followed by all charismatics. Sometimes they use these gifts in situations that St. Paul says don't use them in, or in ways St. Paul says don't use them in. And in terms of is a particular one supernatural or not, well, that's where St. Paul's other dictum from 1 Thessalonians 5 applies. We should be open, we should be, but we should also exercise critical thinking and look at the evidence and inform ourselves that way to the extent we need to form a conclusion. Now, if someone comes to me and says, God's given me a revelation that affects your life, here's this prophecy.
Yeah.
Well, if it affects my life, I may have a greater need to form an opinion about, do I really need to act on this or not?
Right.
But on the other hand, if there's some church somewhere, whether Catholic or not, and they're having prophecies that don't affect me, I don't have a pressing need to form an opinion about that.
Yeah.
I can leave that question open.
Hey, great question. Thank you so much, Bo. We've got more Internet Open Forum coming up with Jimmy Akin right after this.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Love that groovy music. A little bit of groovy Internet Open Forum today with Jimmy Akin. Lots of groovy questions. As a matter of fact, we were just talking at the break about how great the questions are.
Yeah.
People have magnificent questions.
Very interesting ones today.
Yeah. And they all come from the internet, and you know how the internet works. There's a lot of different ways they can get the questions to us, and Jimmy gathers them together, and we go through them. This next one comes from, let me just make sure I'm on the right one, Dylan. Diane. I apologize, Diane. This one comes from Diane. Is the Catholic Church infallible when canonizing saints?
So there has been a very common opinion and an influential opinion down through a number of centuries that it is. That if the Catholic Church canonizes someone, that they are definitely in heaven, that the Church is protected by infallibility when it makes that determination. Having said that, there is a tension that has emerged because as the Church has reflected on its own infallibility and the circumstances in which, and as a result of that influential opinion, by the way, you'll have some people just say, oh yeah, and move on.
Yeah, right.
There's actually a little more to it because there's this tension. As the Church has reflected on the circumstances in which it can exercise the gift of infallibility, this is something that happened particularly at Vatican I and at Vatican II, and even to some degree subsequent to Vatican II. It's been developing its doctrine of infallibility. You know, it's been trying to figure out specifically, precisely when can this gift be exercised, under what conditions. And one of the conditions, now, if what the Church's gift of infallibility is for is to be able to proclaim the doctrines of faith and morals that come to us from Christ and the apostles,
Right.
and their implications. But there are also things that are closely connected with matters of faith and morals, and the church has discerned that, okay, in some situations, we need to be able to infallibly define something that's not handed down from Christ and the apostles, but is connected in some way with a doctrine of the faith. Like, for example, let's suppose an ecumenical council defined something infallibly. Well, you could come along and say, I don't think that council was ecumenical.
Oh, right.
So I don't think its definitions are infallible either. And the church would have a need to settle that question. So the church has come to understand, well, we could, even though the fact this council was ecumenical is not something that's been handed down from the apostles. It's not like St. Peter got a revelation of all the future ecumenical councils.
Right. Yeah.
It is closely enough connected with the doctrine that if we need to defend this doctrine that the council defined, we can defend the council's authority in the same way. And that's what's called a dogmatic fact. It's a fact that's related to dogma, even though it's not a dogma itself. And the category of saint canonizations, if they're infallible, well, it wasn't handed down from Christ and the apostles that Joe Brown was a saint. Joe Brown didn't even live in their day.
Yeah.
So it would have to be in the category of dogmatic fact, not part of the deposit of revelation. And, okay, so as the church has studied this question, it's looked at, what are the conditions under which a church can define a dogmatic fact? It can't define just any fact, like, this microbe causes this disease. That's not connected to dogma enough. That's a matter of science. It's not a dogmatic fact. It's just a fact. And the answer that the magisterium has come up with in recent decades is that in order to be able to define something as a dogmatic fact, it must have a necessary connection with a dogma, so that you have to be able, in order to properly defend the dogma, you have to be able to define that fact. Otherwise, it's just a fact. It's not closely connected with dogma enough. And so that brings us to the question of saint canonizations, because what a saint canonization means is someone died in a state of grace and they're in heaven. Is it necessary to defend some dogma that we know Joe Brown is in heaven, that he was in a state of grace at the moment he died?
No, it's not.
It doesn't seem obvious, does it?
No.
Now, you can argue, well, it somehow defends the church's holiness, but that's somehow defends or somehow amplifies or relates is not the criterion the magisterium has set out. There needs to be a necessary connection.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem obviously necessary that a particular person was in a state of grace at the moment he died. It doesn't seem necessary to know that to be able to defend a doctrine, to defend a dogma. And so that has led some quite orthodox Catholic theologians like Avery Dulles, who was appointed a cardinal because of his theological contributions, to question whether saint canonizations are actually infallible. Now, it's still a very, very common opinion, and that they are infallible, and some very highly influential theologians think so. But I think there's also a question about it, and even very orthodox Catholic theologians like Cardinal Dulles have raised a question of, hey, it doesn't seem obvious that we really need to know this, that someone died in a state of grace in order to defend a dogma.
Right. And not being infallible wouldn't mean therefore
doesn't mean
wrong.
they're not in heaven.
Yeah,
no,
right.
They could very well be in heaven.
Right. But it's just a different standard of certainty.
Yeah.
Yeah. This next one comes from Jorge. It's got a Vatican address on it. No, just kidding. It's not from Jorge in the Vatican. Why is the Novus Ordo preferred or superior to the traditional Latin Mass? Is it really an improvement?
Well, I guess the first thing to say is that not everybody is going to agree that the Novus Ordo, or the current rite of Mass, is to be preferred or is superior to the traditional Latin Mass. And the Church doesn't teach that, so that's a matter of opinion. The Church doesn't have teachings about this form of liturgy is intrinsically better than some other form.
Right.
The Church has a bunch of different liturgies and its different rites. And when the Council Fathers met at Vatican II and endorsed a liturgical reform, what they weren't saying the old rite of Mass was bad. They were just saying it's not as well adapted for today's environment as it could be.
Yeah.
And so we want to better adapt it. And they then authorized a liturgical reform which took place after the council and actually deviated from what the council called for. So there's even another reason you could say, hey, I don't think that certainly the council did not give its blessing to everything that then happened as part of the liturgical reform. Now, ultimately, Paul VI endorsed the results of that reform, although there is apparently, and in conversations, he later said in essence, that he discovered he'd been misled. Mm-hmm. That he was told, there was this one guy, his name was Annibale Bugnini, who was the head of the reform after the council. And Bugnini was the contact point between the consultors who were revising the liturgy and Paul VI, who was giving the approval. And based on, after the reform was implemented, Paul VI would talk to, I don't think it was Louis Bouillet, but it was someone who was among the consultors.
Yeah.
And he would say, why were you guys so concerned that we do X in the reform, Paul VI would say.
Yeah.
And the consultor he was talking to, who's a very famous theologian, said, well, we only approved that because Bugnini told us you wanted it approved.
Oh.
And Paul VI would say, Bugnini told me that all of you were unanimous that this needed to be approved.
It's like The Parent Trap.
Okay.
Do you know what The Parent Trap is?
The movie, yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it.
So you tell one parent that the other parent said this, and then you tell the other parent that this parent said this. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's evidence that Bugnini maliciously manipulated or self-servingly or whatever and manipulated the reform.
Yeah.
So there is room for criticism here. And even regardless of how we got the current rite, it is a holy rite. It is a genuine way of worshiping God. Different people may have different opinions about, because we don't all have the same spirituality, and that's fine. Different people may have different opinions about which form of liturgy makes them get closer to God. They can have different opinions about, hey, maybe we should tweak this or tweak that. They can have different devotions, private devotions that they find helpful. We don't all have to be the same, and what we should do is be charitable to people of all persuasions, because we're not all made the same, and we don't all have to have the same preferences, and that's okay. We shouldn't be looking down on each other as like, oh, I'm a Novus Ordo Catholic, not one of you trads, or I'm a traditional Latin Mass Catholic, not one of you Novus Ordo people, or I'm a Byzantine and I'm better than any of you Latins. None of that is helpful. None of that is spiritual. We should all respect the diversity of rites that exists within the Church, and we should thank God that we have them and that we have people who are getting closer to God by them.
Amen, brother. All right, Jorge, thanks for the question. It's break time. We'll take a quick break and come right back with more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Hey, this is Michael O'Neill, the Miracle Hunter. I'll be delving into the fascinating world of miracles and taking you on a hunt that explores the greatest mysteries and marvels of the Catholic Church. I'll be examining what constitutes a miracle, how miracles are investigated and approved, and the role they play in the lives of the faithful. We'll look at the miracles of the Gospels and early Christianity, considering the claims of the miraculous in our own modern age.
The Miracle Hunter, Saturday at 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, Internet Open Forum today. Hey, we've got that store-wide sale continuing. Everything's on sale, 10 to 25% off. Some stuff up to 50% off. Some stuff more than 50% off. Just go to shop.catholic.com and find all the savings. Part of that deal is it includes $5 bulk shipping. So whatever you buy, just it's $5 shipping within the contiguous United States. Let's go to Stephen's question for Jimmy Akin. In 1 Corinthians 5:11, we are told not to associate with a publicly scandalous person who identifies himself or herself as a Christian, to not even eat with such a person. Is that a command to be taken straightforwardly and applied today? Are we really to not eat with such folks?
So I love this passage, and for a reason that may not be obvious. St. Paul wrote 2 letters to the Corinthians that are in the New Testament. We call them 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. But we know he wrote other letters. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways we know that is in this passage, because Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5, "Now I wrote you not to associate with an immoral person." Mm-hmm. So he's referring back to a letter that he wrote that is not in the New Testament and that came before 1 Corinthians. So he's talking about something he wrote in 0th Corinthians.
0th Corinthians.
Yeah.
Corinthians.
And so I love it for that reason, because we get a reference to 0th Corinthians.
Yeah.
But he's clarifying what he said there, because he said, don't, consort with an immoral person. And they wondered, well, how are we going to do that when all of these people around us are, here in Corinth? I mean, there are these idolaters and they're pagans and they're worshiping idols and they're doing stuff they shouldn't with their bodies. And I've got to get food somewhere.
Yeah.
I got to go to work. How can I not associate with these people? And Paul writes back and he says, I didn't mean non-believers. Because otherwise you would have to go out of the world, you know. So he said, I didn't mean them. I meant someone who bears the name of a brother, someone who claims to be a Christian and is nevertheless an idolater or an adulterer or something like that. Don't consort with them and don't even eat with them. Well, so eating with someone and he's talking. The reason he says that is twofold. He doesn't want to scandalize other people in the Christian community. Like if they see you, if they know you're holding table fellowship, which was a big thing in their culture. If you ate off the same table, that was a sign of respect and agreement, and we're in fellowship and stuff. So in their culture, if you're holding table fellowship with someone who is a known idolater and is nevertheless claiming to be a Christian, that can scandalize other Christians who are only recent ex-idolaters. And they could think, well, maybe it's okay for a Christian to commit idolatry, or something like that, or adultery, or whatever it may be. And we know they had temptations along those lines in the Corinthian church. In fact, this is one of the passages that pertains to that. So he says, don't do it in that situation. Also, it can scandalize the person. If you if you invite someone over to hold table fellowship with you and they're an idolater Christian, it's going to and you don't do anything else, it's going to tend to confirm them
in their
idolatry.
Right.
That's that's what he's envisioning. He's not envisioning other circumstances like I invite the idolater over to try to talk him out of his idolatry.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So Paul's not talking about that. But, and so as a result, we shouldn't look at this as if it's a ironclad law that's to be used in all circumstances.
Right.
It is not. But the principle here is relevant to our own day. God forbid, let's suppose you, Cy Kellett,
yes,
were, well, let's turn it around.
Mm-hmm.
Let's suppose, God forbid, that I, Jimmy Akin, while professing to be a Catholic apologist, nevertheless started worshiping an idol of Odin.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Would that justifiably have an impact on your and my relationship and whether we get together for dinner?
Oh yes, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. This is a problem that needs to be addressed.
Exactly.
It can't just be treated as if everything just goes on normally.
Exactly. Same thing if you, God forbid, while professing to be a Catholic, then started worshiping an idol of Apollo,
yeah,
it would have an impact on our relationship, and I wouldn't just be going out to dinner with you like it was normal.
Right.
This is a horrendous thing
Yeah.
that's happened. It needs to be addressed. We can't just have normal, friendly relations in this kind of circumstance.
Right.
And so that's the underlying principle that that Paul is getting at, and he's giving it a particular application that is similar to, but not necessarily identical with, the application it would have in our culture. But when you have something gravely immoral that is publicly known and that has not been repented of by a fellow Christian, it absolutely should have an impact on your relationship with that person, lest you give scandal to that person or others in the Christian community.
Stephen, thank you. Thank you very much for the question. It's an internet open forum. And now a question from Pat. How old was Jesus really when he died? Seems like he might have been as old as 37.
Well, so there's not a church teaching on how old Jesus was. This is a matter that the church leaves to scholars to figure out. I've done a considerable amount of study on this, and I have written about it, and we may in the show notes have a couple of links to articles I've written that cover this.
Okay.
One of them is and you could also Google them, but one of them is called "What Year Was Jesus Born? The Answer May Surprise You." The other is called "7 Clues Tell Us Precisely When Jesus Died."
So I'm just pointing at Darren. Yeah, we'll put them in the show notes. Yeah.
Okay. So based on my study of this subject, Jesus was born in the year 3/2 BC. What that means is the back half of the year 3 BC or the front half of the year 2 BC. Mm-hmm. That's indicated by evidence in the Gospels, particularly Luke, and it's also the year identified by the vast majority of the church fathers that address the question.
Okay.
Now, what about his birthday? Well, this is much harder. We don't have the kind of evidence I would want to be able to say precisely what his birthday in that year was. However, based on the current state of my research, if I had to pick a date, it would be September 11th, 3 BC.
Really?
Yeah. And there is a reason for that. That's based on the sign in heaven that John sees in Revelation 12. If you interpret it as an actual configuration of the sky with a woman with the sun in her midst and the moon at her feet and so forth, okay, that's Virgo. And when would this arrangement of celestial figures have been there as seen from Jerusalem? And this is connected with Jesus' birth in Revelation 12. Well, it would have been September 11, 3 BC.
Whoa.
So there is an argument to be made. It is not obvious that this is what John is doing.
Sure.
But it does fit the data that we have. So I'll just estimate it as September 11th, 3 BC, which means 2 years and about 4 months before we get to January 1st, AD 1.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then when does Jesus die? Well, that I'm very confident of. April 3rd, AD 33. We have really good evidence for that. And so that would be 32 years and 3 months since January 1st of AD 1. So you take the 2 years and 4 months and the 32 years in 3 months, put them together, you get 34 years in about 7 months. And that is the best estimate I can give on exactly how old Jesus was when he was crucified. 34 years and about 7 months.
I have to just ask you this because we're going to do it soon. Then how do we end up with December 25th as the day we celebrate the birth? I mean, no, but I know that we're not. There's not a sense of.
Here's a possibility.
Yeah.
So the September 11th in 3 BC was the Jewish New Year, and by the civil calendar, and the two dates that you get, December 31st and January 6th, which are in Western and Eastern Christendom, are the main proposed dates, are also tightly conjoined to the turn of the year.
Okay.
And so there may have been a memory from Jewish circles that Jesus was born at the Jewish New Year that then Gentiles applied to the Gentile New Year.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And so that may have been what led to those two different dates that are both like a week from New Year's Day.
Okay. All right. So
that's one possibility.
Yeah. Let's go to Dylan. I think we have time to get Dylan's.
Okay.
Too scared.
Yeah, we do.
Too scared to check, but how did Noah's family reproduce or procreate if everyone's gone?
Well, Noah's family, assuming you're taking the text literally and assuming that there's nobody else alive on Earth, and by the way, if you want more on all that, check out Mysterious World, because I did a two-parter on just this question, on how we understand Noah and the flood. And what the options are. But if we assume that only 8 people survived in the entire world, it was Noah, Noah's wife, Noah's sons, 3 sons, and the sons' wives.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, they would have procreated. Mm-hmm. And there was no incest involved in that. And then in the generation after that, you would have the children of Noah's sons.
Mm-hmm.
And because there were 3 sons, and that meant that you had cousins. And so Noah's grandchildren, would have married their cousins, which is something that can happen. It's not automatically immoral to marry a cousin. It can happen.
Yeah.
And in this situation, it would have needed to happen. And then in the generation after that, you've got even further diversification of the family line, and you wouldn't even need to marry your cousins. You could marry people who were more distantly related. And so this is a situation unlike the situation with Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, where you don't have to marry your sister. You can marry a cousin or someone more distant than that.
That one, I think I said Dylan again, and that was Diane.
Diane.
I don't know why I keep putting an L in Diane's name.
Well,
sorry about that.
You're interpolating. And that's actually not unexpected, because the way we process words, when we're learning to read, we're taught to sound them out letter by letter.
Yeah.
But that's not how we actually do it in practice. The way we do it in practice is we look at the front of the word. And we do this subconsciously, but we look at the front of the word and we look at the end of the word and we infer what the word is. So if you look at the front of Diane and the end of Diane,
looks like Dylan.
It's easy to interpolate an L in the middle of it.
Yeah, because Diane spells her name with a Y, by the way, as well.
Yeah.
I have found as I have gotten older, I'm a less precise reader as far as like I think my brain is doing a lot of like filling in and without pausing on words as much. And sometimes that's a very successful strategy for your brain, but sometimes then you're like, oh, I misread that.
Well, I don't know that that's age-related. It could be, but that happens to everybody, because once you start reading and you're familiar with the vast majority of the words you're going to encounter reading, you use the first-last principle.
Yeah. Sorry about that, Diana. That turned you into Dylan twice in one show, I think. Jimmy Akin has been our guest. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World drops tomorrow. Tell us again what's on tomorrow.
Life on Mars.
Life on Mars. So for all of you David Bowie's fans, Life on Mars. Well, it's not about the David Bowie song.
Not about. I do mention the David Bowie song.
Okay. All right. That does it for us. We'll see you tomorrow, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.